Marcus's hands formed the clumsy signs his 7-year-old daughter had taught him at dinner, and the deaf barista's face crumbled into tears in front of the entire coffee shop. Within 60 seconds, a stranger's phone would capture everything. 3 million people would watch his most vulnerable moment, and the invisible life Marcus had built to protect his daughter from his grief would explode into a spotlight he never asked for. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The morning rush at Cornerstone Coffee was a symphony of sounds that Emma Rodriguez would never hear. The hiss of the espresso machine, the chatter of impatient customers checking their phones, the cheerful ding of the register, all of it existed in a world that was forever silent to her. But Emma had learned long ago that silence didn't mean emptiness. She could feel the vibrations of the grinder through the counter, could read the emotions on people's faces better than most could hear in their voices, could sense the rhythm of the busy shop through the movement of bodies and the patterns of light streaming through the front windows. She had been working at Cornerstone for 6 months now, and she had built a careful, practiced routine. The regular customers knew the drill. They would point to the menu board, hold up fingers to indicate size, and she would nod with her practiced, professional smile. Some customers were kind, patient, understanding. Others were annoyed, frustrated that she couldn't simply hear their orders like a normal barista. Those were the ones whose impatience showed in the sharp jabs of their fingers against the laminated menu, in the exaggerated movements of their mouths as they tried to shout their order at her, as if volume could somehow penetrate the wall of her deafness. On those days, Emma would go home to her small studio apartment and feel the weight of being different pressing down on her chest like a stone. This particular Tuesday morning started like any other. The October sun was weak and watery, casting long shadows across the worn wooden floors of the coffee shop. Emma moved behind the counter with practiced efficiency, her hands flying over the espresso machine, measuring, tamping, steaming. She had been up since 5, as always, her alarm clock a vibrating disc she kept under her pillow. She had stood in front of her bathroom mirror for 20 minutes, as she did every morning, practicing her smile, making sure it reached her eyes, making sure she looked approachable and not like the lonely, exhausted young woman she actually was. Marcus Chun had been a janitor at Riverside Elementary School for 3 years. It wasn't the career he had dreamed of when he was younger, back when the future seemed limitless and full of possibility. But life had a way of rewriting your story whether you agreed to the edits or not. His wife Lily had died in a car accident when their daughter Sophie was only 2 years old. In the span of a single rainy evening, Marcus had gone from being a promising architect with a beautiful family to a widowed single father, drowning in medical bills and funeral expenses. The architecture firm had been understanding at first, but a grieving man who couldn't focus, who missed deadlines, who sometimes broke down crying in the middle of meetings, was not an asset. He had been let go with a severance package and a sympathy card signed by people who barely knew him. The janitorial job had been a lifeline. The hours were stable, the pay was enough to cover rent and food, and most importantly, it didn't require him to pretend to be okay. He could clean classrooms in blessed solitude, pushing his cart down empty hallways, the smell of disinfectant and floor wax his only company. He could cry if he needed to, hidden in a supply closet, and no one would ever know. But more than anything, the job gave him what he needed most: time with Sophie. He could drop her off at school in the morning, work his shift while she was in class, and be there to pick her up every single afternoon. In a world that had taken everything from him, he could still be there for his daughter. Sophie was 7 years old now, and she was a tiny miracle of resilience and joy. She had her mother's dark eyes and her infectious laugh, and she had become Marcus's entire reason for continuing to breathe. She was in 2nd grade, and her teacher, Mrs. Patterson, had recently started teaching the class basic sign language as part of their curriculum on inclusion. Sophie had taken to it immediately, practicing the alphabet at the dinner table, signing "Good morning" and "I love you" to her father with chubby, enthusiastic fingers. For Sophie, it was a game, a secret language, a new way to communicate. For Marcus, watching his daughter's hands form words in the air, it was a reminder that there were still beautiful things in the world worth learning. On that Tuesday morning, Marcus had dropped Sophie off at school and then driven to his second job, the one he had taken on 3 months ago to save up for Sophie's upcoming birthday. She wanted a bicycle, a real one with gears and handbrakes, the kind that would make her feel like a big kid. So Marcus had started working weekend shifts as a maintenance worker at the Riverside Shopping Center, cleaning floors and emptying trash cans and fixing broken bathroom stalls. It was exhausting, but when he imagined Sophie's face lighting up on her birthday morning, it was worth every aching muscle and every hour of lost sleep. After his shift at the shopping center, Marcus had exactly 40 minutes before he'd be back at the elementary school for afternoon dismissal. He was tired, his back hurt, and he needed coffee. He almost never spent money on coffee, viewing it as an unnecessary luxury when he could make instant coffee at home for pennies. But today his exhaustion was a physical weight, and he found himself pulling into the parking lot of Cornerstone Coffee, telling himself it was just this once. Just today. He deserved something warm and caffeinated and made by someone else's hands. The shop was still busy with the tail end of the lunch crowd. Marcus stood in line, his worn canvas jacket dusty from the morning's work, his hands rough and red from industrial cleaning chemicals. He felt out of place among the business casual professionals and the college students with their laptops. He kept his eyes down, studying the menu board, trying to figure out what would give him the most caffeine for the least amount of money. When he finally reached the front of the line, he looked up and found himself facing the barista. She was young, probably mid-20s, with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail and warm brown eyes that seemed to hold a depth of understanding that caught him off guard. She was beautiful in a quiet, unassuming way, and when she smiled at him, it was genuine, not the practiced customer service smile he usually received. Marcus opened his mouth to order, but before he could speak, he noticed something. The barista wasn't looking at his face the way people usually did when they were waiting for you to talk. Her eyes were focused on his lips with an intensity that was almost physical, and then he saw it, the small sign posted on the counter next to the register. It was handwritten in careful block letters. "Hi, my name is Emma. I'm deaf. Please point to your order or write it down. Thank you for your patience." Something shifted in Marcus's chest. He looked at Emma, really looked at her, and he saw something in her eyes that he recognized because he saw it in his own mirror every morning. It was the exhaustion of constantly having to accommodate a world that wasn't built for you. It was the loneliness of being different. It was the quiet resignation of someone who had learned not to expect too much from other people. The line behind him was growing restless. He could feel the impatience radiating from the bodies pressing closer, could sense the irritation of people who just wanted their coffee and didn't want to deal with complications. And in that moment, Marcus made a decision. He didn't point to the menu. He didn't pull out his phone to type a message. Instead, he lifted his hands, and with the careful, slightly clumsy movements Sophie had taught him at their dinner table, he signed. The movements were simple, basic. The signs a 7-year-old had learned from a second-grade teacher, but they were clear. His fingers formed the letters and words with earnest concentration. "Hi, my name is Marcus. Can I please have a medium coffee? Black, thank you." And then, because Sophie had made him practice it over and over until he got it right, because she had told him it was the most important thing you could ever say to someone, he added one more sign. His hand moved to his face, fingers extended, then swept outward in the gesture that meant beautiful. "You're beautiful." The coffee shop didn't go silent. The espresso machine still hissed. The other customers still murmured into their phones. The door chime still rang as new people entered. But for Emma, everything stopped. She stared at Marcus, her eyes suddenly wide and bright, and for the first time in 6 months of working at Cornerstone Coffee, someone saw the tears that spilled down her cheeks. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of shock, of overwhelming gratitude, of the pure, unfiltered joy that comes when someone sees you, truly sees you, in a world that so often looks right through you. Her hands flew to her mouth, and then she was laughing and crying at the same time, and the other customers in line started to notice that something unusual was happening at the counter. Marcus stood frozen, suddenly terrified that he had done something wrong, that he had offended her somehow, that his clumsy signing had been insulting rather than kind. His face flushed with embarrassment, and he started to sign an apology. But Emma was already shaking her head, her hands moving in rapid, fluid gestures that were far beyond his limited understanding. She was signing back to him, her movements graceful and confident, and even though he couldn't understand most of what she was saying, he could read the emotion in her face. She was happy, she was grateful, she was seen. Behind Marcus, a woman in a business suit cleared her throat loudly, an aggressive sound meant to remind him that other people were waiting, that he was taking too long, that this touching moment was inconveniencing her schedule. But before Marcus could step aside, something unexpected happened. A teenage girl near the pickup counter, who had been watching the entire exchange with wide eyes, suddenly started to clap. It was a slow clap at first, tentative, but then it grew louder, more confident, and then an elderly man sitting by the window joined in, then a young mother with a toddler on her hip. Within seconds, the entire coffee shop was applauding, and the woman in the business suit looked around in confusion, and then, reluctantly, lowered her phone and started clapping too. Emma's coworker, a young man named Tyler with a patchy beard and kind eyes, came up beside her and gently squeezed her shoulder. He had been working with Emma since she started, and he had watched her endure countless moments of frustration and invisible discrimination. He had seen customers roll their eyes, had heard them mutter complaints about how hiring deaf people was taking inclusivity too far, had witnessed Emma's smile become a little more fixed, a little less genuine with each passing week, and now, watching her cry tears of joy because a tired-looking man in a dusty jacket had taken 30 seconds to learn her language, Tyler felt his own throat tighten with emotion. Tyler quickly made Marcus's coffee himself, refusing to let Emma do it because her hands were shaking too much. He made it carefully, with more attention than he usually gave to a simple black coffee, and when he handed it to Marcus, he waved away the $5 bill Marcus tried to give him. "On the house," he said, even though Emma couldn't hear him. Marcus looked at Tyler, then at Emma, then at the still applauding crowd, and he felt something he hadn't felt in 3 long years. He felt like maybe, just maybe, there was still kindness in the world. He felt like maybe his daughter was being raised in a place where small gestures of humanity still mattered. Emma wiped her tears with the back of her hand and then signed something to Marcus. He didn't understand it, but she could see the confusion on his face. So she grabbed a napkin and a pen and wrote in quick, neat handwriting. "Thank you. You made my whole year." "What's your daughter's name?" Marcus stared at the napkin. "How did you know I have a daughter?" Emma smiled and pointed to his jacket. There was a small pink unicorn sticker on the collar, the kind that came in those cheap packs from the dollar store. Sophie had stuck it there last week and he hadn't had the heart to remove. He laughed, a real laugh, the kind that surprised him with its sudden appearance. "Sophie," he wrote back on the napkin. "She's 7. She's learning sign language at school. She taught me." Emma's smile grew even wider. She wrote something else. "She's a good teacher. You signed it perfectly." Then she hesitated, her pen hovering over the napkin, and Marcus could see her debating with herself. Finally, she wrote one more line. "Come back sometime? I'd like to meet her." Marcus felt his heart do something strange in his chest, something that felt like hope, something that felt dangerously close to possibility. He nodded, took his coffee, and walked out of Cornerstone Coffee feeling lighter than he had in years. For the rest of the day, Marcus couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. Picked up Sophie from school, listened to her chatter about her day, heated up leftover spaghetti for dinner, and helped her with her homework. But in the quiet moments, his mind kept returning to the coffee shop, to Emma's tears, to the way the whole shop had erupted in applause. He kept thinking about the napkin he had folded carefully and put in his pocket. "Come back sometime." That night, after Sophie was asleep, Marcus sat at their small kitchen table and did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He looked up sign language videos online. He stayed up until past midnight, his phone propped against a coffee mug, watching his own hands try to mirror the movements on the screen. He learned how to sign coffee and thank you and nice to meet you. He learned how to fingerspell his name more smoothly, how to sign daughter and school and happy. His fingers felt clumsy and thick, and he kept forgetting the movements as soon as he learned them, but he kept practicing, because somewhere in the back of his mind, a tiny, fragile voice was whispering that maybe this was important, maybe this mattered. At Cornerstone Coffee, Emma's shift had ended hours ago, but she was still thinking about the man in the dusty jacket. She sat in her tiny studio apartment, the space barely bigger than a college dorm room, with her laptop open in front of her. She had been accepted to the state university for the spring semester, planning to study education with a focus on deaf studies. She wanted to be a teacher, wanted to help deaf children navigate a hearing world, wanted to be the person she wished she'd had when she was growing up. But the tuition was expensive, and even with financial aid, she was still short. That's why she was working at the coffee shop, saving every penny, living on ramen and hope. She opened her journal, an old leather-bound book that her grandmother had given her before she passed away. Emma wrote in it every night, chronicling the small moments of her day, the interactions that meant something, the times when she felt seen or invisible. Tonight she wrote about Marcus. She wrote about his nervous, clumsy signing, about the way he had called her beautiful without even realizing how much she needed to hear it, about the way the entire coffee shop had applauded. She wrote, "Today I remembered why I want to be a teacher, because small acts of kindness can change everything. Because learning someone's language is an act of love." But Emma didn't know, couldn't know, that the encounter in the coffee shop had been witnessed by more than just the customers. One of the teenage girls who had started the applause had filmed the entire interaction on her phone. She was an aspiring content creator, always looking for heartwarming moments to post online, and this had been pure gold. She uploaded the video to her social media account that night with a simple caption: "Single dad janitor learns sign language for his daughter, then uses it to make a deaf barista's day. Faith in humanity restored." She posted it and went to bed, not expecting much. By morning, the video had 20,000 views. By noon, it had 500,000. By the time Marcus's shift ended at the elementary school the next day, it had been viewed 3 million times and was trending on multiple platforms. People were commenting in dozens of languages, sharing their own stories of kindness, tagging their friends, creating reaction videos. The moment in Cornerstone Coffee, that small, genuine interaction between two lonely people, had somehow captured the internet's attention in a way that felt both wonderful and terrifying. Marcus had no idea. He didn't have social media accounts, barely checked his email, and spent his free time watching cartoon movies with Sophie, or falling asleep reading the same page of a book over and over. So when he walked into the teacher's lounge at Riverside Elementary on Wednesday afternoon to empty the trash can, he was completely unprepared for the reaction he received. Mrs. Patterson, Sophie's teacher, looked up from her phone and her eyes went wide. "Oh my God," she said, her voice loud enough to make the other teachers turn and look. "You're the sign language dad. You're famous." Marcus stared at her in confusion, his hand still gripping the handle of his cleaning cart. "I'm sorry, what?" Mrs. Patterson jumped up from her chair and rushed over to him, her phone held out like evidence. "You," she said, breathless with excitement. "The video of you signing to that deaf barista. It's everywhere. My sister sent it to me, my mom sent it to me, I've seen it shared by at least 20 different people. Marcus, you're viral." She turned the phone around and pressed play. Marcus watched himself, small and grainy on the screen, standing in line at Cornerstone Coffee. He watched his hands form the clumsy signs, watched Emma's face crumble into tears, watched the applause ripple through the shop. The video had been edited with soft piano music and text overlays explaining what was happening. And in the comments section below, Thousands upon thousands of people had written messages of support and admiration. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He didn't want to be famous. He didn't want strangers watching the most genuine moment he'd had in years and turning it into content. He didn't want his face associated with inspirational hashtags and feel-good stories. He just wanted to be left alone to live his quiet, small life with his daughter. But Mrs. Patterson was still talking, practically vibrating with enthusiasm. "This is amazing, Marcus. The school board is going to love this. Do you know how good this makes our sign language program look? And Sophie must be so proud. Does she know her dad is a viral sensation?" Sophie didn't know. When Marcus picked her up from school that afternoon, she was her usual bouncing, chattering self, telling him about how she got to be line leader and how the class hamster had escaped and how Tommy Martinez had thrown up after lunch. Marcus listened and nodded and made the appropriate concern sounds, but his mind was elsewhere. He was thinking about the video, about the 3 million views, about the fact that his private moment of connection had been turned into public entertainment. He felt violated in a way he couldn't quite articulate, like someone had picked the lock to his heart and invited the world to come look inside. That evening, as Sophie was taking her bath, Marcus's phone started ringing. It was a number he didn't recognize with a local area code. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Hello, Mr. Chun?" The voice on the other end was smooth and professional, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who was used to getting what they wanted. "My name is Patricia Vance, and I'm a producer for Morning Sunshine, the morning talk show. We would love to have you and the barista from the video on our show. We think your story is incredibly heartwarming, and our viewers would be inspired." Marcus felt his chest tighten with anxiety. "I appreciate the offer, but no thank you, I'm not interested." There was a pause on the other end of the line, as if Patricia Vance had never heard those words before. "Mr. Chun, we would compensate you for your time. We're talking about a substantial appearance fee, plus travel expenses, and the exposure could be life-changing. Think of the opportunities this could open up for you and your daughter." Marcus closed his eyes, thinking of the bicycle Sophie wanted, the one he was working double shifts to afford. The appearance fee from a national talk show could probably pay for the bike and 6 months of rent, but the thought of sitting on a stage, bright lights shining in his face, having to perform his grief and his kindness for an audience of millions made him feel physically sick. "I said no thank you," Marcus repeated, his voice firmer this time. "I'm not interested in being on television. Please don't call this number again." He hung up before Patricia Vance could respond, and then he turned off his phone completely. He stood in the small kitchen listening to Sophie sing in the bathtub, and he felt the walls of his quiet life starting to crack under the pressure of unwanted attention. Emma found out about the video from Tyler. He showed up at her apartment early Wednesday morning before her shift was supposed to start, banging on her door until she answered. When she opened it, still in her pajamas, her hair a mess, Tyler immediately pulled her into a hug. "You're famous," he said, and even though Emma couldn't hear him, she could read the excitement on his face. He pulled out his phone and showed her the video. Emma watched herself cry, watched the stranger sign to her, watched her own face transform from professional courtesy to genuine joy. She watched the view count tick higher in real time. Emma's first emotion was embarrassment. The video showed her at her most vulnerable, tears streaming down her face, her careful composure shattered. It showed her loneliness, her desperate hunger to be seen, her pathetic gratitude for the smallest gesture of inclusion. She covered her face with her hands, mortified, but Tyler gently pulled her hands away. "Don't," he signed. He had been learning sign language since Emma started working at Cornerstone, taking online classes in his spare time. "Don't be embarrassed. You showed people something real, something beautiful." Emma looked at the comments section, using the translation feature to read messages in English, Spanish, Arabic, Mandarin, dozens of languages she didn't speak. People were calling her an inspiration. They were sharing stories of their own disabilities, their own moments of isolation and connection. They were tagging deaf advocacy organizations and schools for the deaf. One comment, which had thousands of likes, simply said, "This is what inclusion looks like. This is why representation matters." And then Emma noticed something else. Several comments were asking where they could donate to help her. Someone had apparently done some internet detective work and discovered that Emma was saving money for college, working a minimum wage job to pursue her dream of becoming a teacher. A link to a crowdfunding page had appeared, though Emma had never created one herself. Some well-meaning stranger had set it up on her behalf. People were donating $20, $50, $100. As Emma watched, the total climbed higher and higher. Strangers from around the world contributing to the education of a deaf barista they would never meet. Emma sat down hard on her worn couch, staring at the phone in her hand. The amount on the crowdfunding page was already more than she made in 3 months at the coffee shop. It was enough to cover her first semester of tuition. It was enough to buy textbooks and supplies. It was enough to transform her impossible dream into a tangible possibility. She started to cry again, but this time the tears were different. They were complicated. A mixture of gratitude and discomfort, joy and violation. She hadn't asked for this charity. She hadn't wanted her financial struggles broadcast to the world. But here it was, this overwhelming wave of human kindness from people who had been moved by 30 seconds of video. Tyler sat beside her and put his arm around her shoulders. "What do you want to do?" he signed. Emma wiped her eyes and thought about it. She thought about Marcus, the man in the video whose name she had learned from the comments section. She thought about how he must be feeling, having his private moment of compassion turned into a public spectacle. She thought about the responsibility that came with this kind of attention, the pressure to be grateful and gracious and inspiring when all she wanted to do was hide. Finally, she signed her answer. I want to thank him. I want to meet him properly, not for the cameras. Just as people. Tyler nodded and pulled out his phone. Let me see if I can track him down. It turned out that tracking down Marcus Chun was easier than expected. Several people in the comments had identified him as a janitor at Riverside Elementary School, and one particularly dedicated internet sleuth had even found the school's phone number. Tyler called and spoke to the front office, explaining that he was trying to reach Marcus on behalf of Emma Rodriguez, the barista from the video. The school secretary, a woman named Linda, who had already fielded a dozen similar calls that morning, was skeptical at first. But when Tyler mentioned that Emma wanted to meet Marcus privately, away from media attention, Linda softened. She took down Tyler's number and promised to pass along the message when Marcus came in for his afternoon shift. Marcus got the message written on a pink sticky note that Linda had pressed into his hand as he was signing in for work. Emma from Cornerstone Coffee would like to meet you. No cameras, no press, just a thank you. Here's her coworker's number. Marcus stared at the note for a long time, feeling the weight of decision pressing down on his shoulders. Part of him wanted to throw the note away, to pretend the whole thing had never happened, to retreat back into his carefully constructed life of invisibility. But another part of him, a part that had been dormant for 3 years, was curious. He wanted to see Emma again. He wanted to know if that moment in the coffee shop had been as real for her as it had been for him. During his lunch break, Marcus sat in his car in the school parking lot and called the number. Tyler answered on the second ring. Marcus Chun? Yeah, it's me. Look, I don't want to be on any TV shows or do any interviews. Tyler's voice was warm and understanding. Emma doesn't want that either. She just wants to meet you, to say thank you properly. No cameras, no social media. Just two people having a conversation. Can you meet her tomorrow? There's a park near the coffee shop, Riverside Park. Emma's shift ends at 3. Marcus thought about his schedule. He could make it work. The elementary school let out at 3:15, but his mother-in-law could pick up Sophie for once. She had been offering to help more, trying to ease his burden, but Marcus had been too proud and too protective to accept. Maybe it was time to let someone else carry the weight for an afternoon. Okay, Marcus said. Tomorrow at 3. Riverside Park. How will I know where to find her? Tyler laughed. Trust me, you'll know. She'll be the one who looks like she's about to have a panic attack. Marcus found himself smiling despite everything. Same, he said. After he hung up, Marcus sat in his car for a few more minutes, watching the elementary school students run around the playground during recess. He saw Sophie, her dark pigtails flying as she chased her friends in a game of tag. She was laughing, carefree, blissfully unaware that her father was briefly internet famous. He wanted to keep it that way. He wanted to protect her from the strange, overwhelming attention that came with viral videos and strangers who thought they knew you based on 30 seconds of footage. That night, Marcus asked his mother-in-law, Helen, if she could pick up Sophie the next day. Helen was Lily's mother, and she had been a steady, quiet presence in their lives since the accident. She came over once a week to have dinner with them, always bringing Sophie little gifts and Marcus's containers of homemade soup. She grieved her daughter in silent, private ways, and Marcus respected that. When he called and asked for help, Helen immediately agreed, no questions asked. Though Marcus could hear the curiosity in her voice when she said, "Of course, Marcus. Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," he said, which wasn't exactly true, but wasn't exactly false. I just have something I need to do. The next day moved with agonizing slowness. Marcus went through the motions of his job, cleaning classrooms and emptying trash cans and mopping floors, but his mind was elsewhere. He kept rehearsing what he might say to Emma, how he might explain that the sign language had been a spontaneous gesture, not some calculated act of kindness. He wanted her to know that he hadn't been trying to be a hero or make a statement about inclusion. He had just seen another human being who was struggling in a world that didn't accommodate them, and he had wanted for one brief moment to make that struggle a little bit easier, because he understood. God, did he understand what it felt like to be invisible? At 2:30, Marcus clocked out early, claiming he had a doctor's appointment. He drove to Riverside Park, his heart pounding with an anxiety that felt strangely like anticipation. The park was beautiful in the late afternoon light, the October leaves painting the world in shades of amber and crimson. There were families scattered across the grass, children on the playground, an elderly couple feeding ducks by the pond. It was the kind of scene that belonged on a postcard, the kind of wholesome Americana that felt both comforting and slightly unreal. Marcus saw Emma immediately. She was sitting on a bench near the playground, her hands folded in her lap, her posture rigid with nervous tension. She was wearing jeans and a soft green sweater, her hair down around her shoulders instead of pulled back in the practical ponytail she wore at work. She looked younger this way, more vulnerable, and when she saw Marcus approaching, she stood up so quickly she almost tripped over her own feet. For a moment, they just looked at each other, two people who had shared an intimate moment that had somehow become public property. Then Emma smiled, tentative and genuine, and Marcus felt some of his anxiety dissolve. Emma pulled out her phone and opened a notes app, typing quickly. "Hi, thank you for coming." "I know this whole thing has been crazy," Marcus nodded, pulling out his own phone to type back. "It has. I'm sorry about the video. I didn't know anyone was filming. Emma's eyes widened and she typed furiously. Please don't apologize. He didn't do anything wrong. That girl who filmed it, she messaged me and apologized. She didn't mean for it to become such a big thing. She just thought it was a nice moment. Marcus read her message and then typed his response. It was a nice moment until it wasn't private anymore. They sat down on the bench together, a comfortable distance between them, and for a while they just typed back and forth on their phones, the conversation flowing more naturally than Marcus had expected. Emma told him about the crowdfunding page, about how uncomfortable she was accepting money from strangers, but how much it meant for her education. Marcus told her about the phone calls from television producers, about how he had turned off his phone for 2 days just to escape the constant requests for interviews. They talked about their lives, the broad strokes first, and then the smaller details. Emma told him about losing her hearing at age 12 from meningitis, about how she had to relearn everything about how to exist in the world. Marcus told her about Lily, about the accident, about how he became a janitor because it was the only job that let him be there for Sophie. Conversations stretched on, the afternoon sun dipping lower in the sky, painting everything in golden light. At some point, Marcus stopped typing and started signing, his movements still clumsy but more confident than they had been in the coffee shop. Emma's face lit up when he signed, and she signed back, slowing down her movements so he could follow. They communicated in this hybrid language, a mixture of signs and typed words and facial expressions, and it felt more honest than any conversation Marcus had had in years, because Emma understood something fundamental about it. She understood what it meant to be the person everyone looked past, the person whose struggles were invisible because they didn't come with obvious sympathy or easy solutions. As they talked, Marcus realized something that both excited and terrified him. He liked Emma, not just as a fellow traveler through hardship, but as a person. He liked her quiet sense of humor, the way she rolled her eyes when she told him about difficult customers at the coffee shop. He liked her determination to become a teacher despite all the obstacles in her way. He liked the way she listened, really listened, giving him her full attention in a way that made him feel seen. And he hadn't felt seen, truly seen, since Lily died. But with that realization came a crushing wave of guilt. How could he be sitting here enjoying the company of another woman when his wife had been dead for only 3 years? How could he be noticing the way Emma's eyes crinkled when she smiled, the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when she was thinking, the way her hands moved with such grace when she signed? Lily had been the love of his life, his soulmate, his entire world, and here he was on a park bench with a woman he barely knew, feeling something that felt dangerously close to attraction. The guilt was a physical thing, sitting heavy in his chest like a stone. Emma must have seen something change in his face because she stopped signing and typed on her phone. Are you okay? You look upset. Marcus stared at the message for a long moment, debating how much truth to share. Finally, he typed back, I feel guilty for enjoying this conversation, for liking talking to you. My wife hasn't been gone that long. Emma read his message and her expression softened with understanding. She typed slowly, carefully choosing her words. Grief doesn't have a timeline, and feeling happiness again doesn't mean you loved her any less. It just means you're still alive, and being alive means feeling things, even when it's complicated. Marcus read her words 3 times, feeling tears prick at the corners of his eyes. He'd been so focused on surviving, on being strong for Sophie, on pushing through each day with grim determination that he had forgotten what it felt like to actually live. He had forgotten that joy and sorrow could exist in the same heart, that moving forward didn't mean leaving Lily behind. Emma reached out tentatively and placed her hand on his arm, a brief touch of comfort and solidarity. Marcus looked at her hand and then at her face, and he saw reflected in her eyes a familiar pain. She understood loss too. Maybe not the same kind of loss, but loss nonetheless. She had lost her hearing, her old identity, her easy place in the world. She knew what it meant to grieve for something that could never be recovered. They sat in silence for a while, watching the families in the park, the children running and playing, the dogs chasing frisbees, the world continuing its relentless forward motion. Then Emma pulled out her phone again. Can I ask you something? Marcus nodded. Emma typed carefully. Would you want to get coffee sometime? Real coffee, not just a chance encounter. I'd like to get to know you better, not because of the video, because I think you're interesting and kind, and I don't have many friends who understand what it's like to feel like an outsider. Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. This was the moment. He could say yes and open himself up to the possibility of connection, of friendship, of maybe something more. Or he could say no and retreat back into his safe, lonely existence. He thought about Sophie, about how she was always begging him to make friends, to go out more, to stop being so sad all the time. He thought about Lily, about what she would want for him. And he knew with absolute certainty that Lily would want him to say yes. Lily had been all light and love and laughter, and she would hate knowing that her death had turned him into a ghost. Marcus typed his response. I'd like that, but I have to be honest. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be friends with someone new. I don't know how to let someone in. Kind of a mess. Emma smiled and typed back, me too. So we'll figure it out together. How about Saturday? There's a cafe near the university that's supposed to be really good. It's quieter than Cornerstone. Less chance of going viral again. Marcus laughed, a real genuine laugh, and it felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. Saturday works. I'll have to bring Sophie, though. I don't have a babysitter. Emma's face lit up. Bring her. I'd love to meet the girl who taught you to sign. They exchanged phone numbers, and as they stood to leave, Emma did something unexpected. She hugged him. It was a quick, spontaneous gesture, and Marcus found himself hugging her back. feeling the warmth of another human being, the simple comfort of physical connection. When they pulled apart, Emma signed something. Marcus didn't understand all of it, but he caught the word friend. He signed it back, the movement feeling more natural now. Friend. Marcus drove home feeling lighter than he had in months. When he picked up Sophie from Helen's house, his daughter immediately noticed the change in it. "Daddy, you're smiling," she said, her voice full of wonder and delight. "You never smile like that. What happened?" Marcus scooped her up in his arms, something he didn't do as often as he should because she was getting so big and his back hurt from his custodial work. "I made a friend," he said. "A new friend who knows sign language." Sophie's eyes went wide. "Really? Can I meet her?" "You will," Marcus promised. "On Saturday, we're all going to get coffee together." Sophie threw her arms around his neck and squeezed tight. "I'm so happy you made a friend, Daddy. You're always so lonely." Her words hit him harder than any adult observation could have. Bouts of babes came devastating truth. He had been lonely, crushingly, suffocatingly lonely, but he had convinced himself that loneliness was his penance, his punishment for not being able to save Lily. He had worn his isolation like armor, believing that if he never let anyone get close again, he could never be hurt again. But Sophie deserved better than a father who was merely surviving. She deserved a father who was living. That night after Sophie was asleep, Marcus did something he rarely allowed himself to do. He pulled out the old photo albums, the ones he kept in a box at the back of his closet. He looked at pictures of Lily, his beautiful Lily with her bright smile and her artist's hands and her fearless approach to life. He looked at their wedding photos, at pictures of Lily pregnant with Sophie, at snapshots of their little family before the accident. And for the first time in 3 years, the memories didn't feel like they were drowning him. They felt like a gift, a reminder of what he had been capable of feeling, of loving, of being. He pulled out his phone and looked at the last text message from Emma. "I had a really nice time today. Thank you for meeting me. Thank you for being you." Marcus stared at the message for a long time, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. And he typed, "Thank you for seeing me. For real. Not just the guy in the video, the actual me." He sent it before he could overthink it. And Emma's response came back almost immediately. "That's the only person I'm interested in knowing." Meanwhile, across town, Emma was lying in bed, unable to sleep. She kept replaying the afternoon in her mind, the conversation with Marcus, the way he had looked at her with such genuine interest and warmth. She'd been on dates before, awkward encounters set up by well-meaning friends who thought she just needed to get out more. But those dates had always felt like performances. The men either treating her disability like an obstacle to overcome or like an inspirational story to tell their friends. "Look at me, dating a deaf girl. Aren't I progressive?" But Marcus had been different. He hadn't treated her like she was broken or brave or anything other than a person. He had seen her loneliness and recognized it because he carried the same weight. There was no performance in their conversation, no pretense. Just two people who had been beaten down by life finding a moment of respite in each other's company. Emma thought about the crowdfunding page, about the money that was still accumulating from strangers around the world. She had enough now for her first year of tuition. She could quit her job at the coffee shop, focus on her studies, finally pursue the dream that had seemed impossibly distant just a week ago. But part of her wondered if she would miss the coffee shop, because if she hadn't been working there, if she hadn't been behind that counter on that Tuesday afternoon, she would never have met Marcus. The viral video that had felt like such a violation of privacy had also been the catalyst for something new, something fragile but full of possibility. It was a strange feeling, being grateful and resentful at the same time, appreciating the outcome while hating the process. Emma pulled out her journal and began to write. "This week, my life changed because a stranger was kind, but it changed even more because that stranger became a friend, and I'm starting to remember what hope feels like." Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made everything feel possible. Marcus woke early, his stomach fluttering with a nervousness he hadn't felt since he was a teenager going on his first date. He told himself repeatedly that this wasn't a date. It was just coffee with a friend and his 7-year-old daughter as a chaperone. There was nothing romantic about it, but his hand still shook slightly as he shaved, and he changed his shirt 3 times before settling on a simple navy blue button-down that Sophie declared made him look handsome like a prince. Sophie was beside herself with excitement. She'd been asking questions all week about Emma, about what she looked like, about whether she was nice, about whether she would become Sophie's friend too. Marcus had tried to downplay the whole thing, not wanting Sophie to get too attached or to build up expectations that might not be met. But Sophie had inherited her mother's optimism and her inability to contain enthusiasm. She wore her favorite purple dress with the sparkly unicorn on the front and insisted on bringing her sign language flashcards so she could practice with Emma. They arrived at the cafe 15 minutes early. Marcus had wanted to be on time, not early, but Sophie had rushed him out the door with the urgency of a child who couldn't wait for something wonderful to happen. The cafe was called Quiet Moments, and it was exactly as Emma had described. Small, cozy, with mismatched furniture and soft lighting. The walls were covered with local art, and there was a small bookshelf in the corner with a sign that said, "Take a book, leave a book." It felt like the kind of place where people came to actually talk to each other, not just stare at their phones. Emma was already there, sitting at a corner table near the window. She had arrived even earlier than Marcus, too nervous to wait at home. When she saw Marcus and Sophie walk in, she stood up, her hands suddenly clammy with anxiety. This was important. She knew it was important. Sophie was the most important person in Marcus's life, and if Sophie didn't like her, if they didn't connect, then this fragile new friendship would crumble before it even had a chance to take root. Emma watched as Marcus bent down to say something to Sophie, pointing in her direction, and then Sophie's face lit up like a sunrise and she came running over. "Hi," Sophie signed with enthusiastic, slightly imperfect movements. "My name is Sophie. You are Emma. You are pretty. My daddy says you are nice." Emma felt tears spring to her eyes for the second time in a week. There was something about this child's unfiltered kindness, her pure acceptance, that broke through every defense Emma had constructed. She knelt down to Sophie's level and signed back, slowing her movements so the little girl could follow. "Hi, Sophie. Your name is beautiful. I love your unicorn dress. Thank you for teaching your daddy to sign. He told me you are a wonderful teacher." Sophie beamed with pride and turned to Marcus, who had caught up to them. "Daddy, she can understand me. She knows what I'm saying." Marcus smiled at Emma over his daughter's head, and in that smile Emma saw relief and gratitude and something else, something warmer that made her heart beat a little faster. They sat down at the table and ordered drinks: hot chocolate with marshmallows for Sophie, black coffee for Marcus, and a caramel latte for Emma. For a while, the conversation was simple and easy, carried mostly by Sophie's endless questions. How did you learn sign language? When did you lose your hearing? Do you have any pets? Can you drive a car? Do you like unicorns? Emma answered each question with patience and warmth, never talking down to Sophie, treating her like a real person whose curiosity mattered. Marcus watched the interaction with a growing sense of wonder. He'd been so worried about how Sophie would react, but his daughter had taken to Emma immediately. With the easy acceptance that children have before the world teaches them to see differences as deficits, they were using a mixture of signs and spoken words, Sophie narrating everything Emma signed so Marcus could follow along, creating this beautiful three-way conversation that felt more natural than any interaction Marcus had experienced in years. After they finished their drinks, Sophie pulled out her flashcards, insisting that Emma quiz her on the sign. Emma readily agreed, and they spent the next half hour going through the cards, Emma correcting Sophie's hand shapes with gentle guidance, praising her effort and enthusiasm. Marcus sat back and watched, feeling something shift inside his chest. This was what family was supposed to feel like: warm and easy and full of laughter. He had forgotten that feeling existed outside of his memories of Lily. Eventually, Sophie spotted the bookshelf and asked if she could go pick out a book. Marcus said yes, and for the first time that morning he and Emma were alone. The silence between them felt comfortable rather than awkward, and Marcus found himself just looking at Emma. Really looking at her. She was wearing a soft gray sweater and jeans, her hair pulled back in a loose braid, and there was a lightness in her expression that hadn't been there at the park. She looked happy. She looked at peace. Emma caught him staring and smiled, typing on her phone. "She's wonderful. You're doing an amazing job with her." Marcus felt a lump form in his throat. He typed back, "I'm just trying not to mess her up too badly. Most days I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing." Emma read his message and shook her head, typing quickly, "You're teaching her kindness. You're teaching her to see people who are invisible to everyone else. That's not nothing, Marcus. That's everything." Before Marcus could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and his expression darkened. It was another unfamiliar number, probably another media request. He had been getting them all week despite repeatedly declining interviews. He declined this call too, but before he could put his phone away, it rang again, and then again. Emma noticed the change in his demeanor and typed a question. "What's wrong?" Marcus sighed and typed back, "The video. People won't stop calling. Producers, reporters, even a book agent who wants me to write a memoir about finding hope after loss. It's exhausting." Emma's face fell with guilt. She typed slowly, "I'm so sorry. This is my fault. If I hadn't cried, if I hadn't reacted so emotionally, the video wouldn't have gone viral. You'd still have your privacy." Marcus read her message and immediately shook his head, reaching across the table to touch her hand. He typed with his other hand, "Don't apologize. You didn't do anything wrong. Your reaction was real and honest, and that's why it mattered to people. I just wish I could make them understand that I don't want to be a symbol or an inspiration. I just want to be a regular person living a regular life." They sat there for a moment, hands still touching across the table, and Emma felt the electricity of that contact run through her entire body. She looked at Marcus and saw in his eyes a mirror of her own complicated feelings: fear and hope, loneliness and connection, the desperate desire to protect yourself and the equally desperate desire to let someone... She typed a new message. "What if we made a statement together? A video or a post saying thank you for the support but asking people to respect our privacy. Maybe if we address it directly, people will back off." Marcus considered this. It made sense. The media kept pursuing them because they were mysterious, refusing to engage. Maybe if they engaged once on their own terms, they could reclaim some control over the narrative. He was about to respond when Sophie came running back to the table, a picture book clutched in her hands. "Daddy, look. It's about a deaf girl who goes on an adventure. Can we get it?" Marcus looked at the book and then at Emma, and he made a decision. "Yes, sweetheart. We can get it, and maybe Emma can help you read it." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of easy comfort. They left the cafe and walked to the nearby park, the same park where Marcus and Emma had first met privately. Sophie ran ahead, chasing fallen leaves and pointing out dogs and climbing on the playground equipment. Marcus and Emma walked slowly behind her, their conversation flowing through text and occasional signs. They talked about everything and nothing. Emma told him about her plans for university, about the classes she wanted to take, about her dream of opening a school specifically for deaf children. Marcus told her about Sophie's upcoming birthday, about the bicycle he was saving for, about his secret dream of someday going back to architecture even though it felt impossible now. At one point, Sophie ran back to them and grabbed both their hands, pulling them toward the swings. She wanted Emma to push her, wanted Marcus to watch, wanted to show off how high she could go. And as Marcus stood there watching his daughter soar through the air, her laughter ringing out across the park with Emma standing beside him smiling and waving, he felt something he thought he would never feel again. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he could be happy again. Not the same happiness he had with Lily, that could never be replicated, but a different kind of happiness. A second chance kind of happiness, and the guilt that thought brought was a little bit lighter than it had been before. That evening, after Marcus had dropped Sophie off at Helen's house for a sleepover, he sat alone in his empty apartment and made a decision. He called Emma using the video chat feature she had suggested, so they could sign to each other more easily. When her face appeared on his screen, Marcus felt his heart do that strange flutter again, and he knew with certainty that this was more than friendship. He was developing feelings for Emma Rodriguez, and that both terrified and exhilarated him. They talked for 2 hours, the longest conversation Marcus had had with anyone other than his daughter in 3 years. During that conversation, they decided to make the joint statement Emma had suggested. They would record a simple video together, thanking people for their support, but asking for privacy moving. They agreed to meet the next day at Emma's apartment to film it. When they finally said goodnight, Marcus lay in bed staring at the ceiling, his mind racing. He thought about Lily, about whether she would approve of Emma, and then he remembered something Lily had said to him once late at night when they were lying in bed talking about the future. She had made him promise that if anything ever happened to her, he would find love again. He had laughed it off at the time, told her nothing was going to happen, but she had been insistent. Promise me, Marcus. Promise me you won't spend the rest of your life alone. Life is too short and love is too precious to waste. The next morning, Marcus drove to Emma's apartment with his phone and a cheap tripod he had borrowed from the school's media center. Emma's place was small but warm, filled with plants and books and photographs. There was a corkboard on the wall covered with pictures of Emma with various people, friends and family, all of them smiling and signing at the camera. Marcus noticed that in every photo, Emma looked genuinely happy, surrounded by people who clearly loved her. It made him realize that despite her loneliness in the hearing world, Emma had built a community in the deaf community, had found her people in a way Marcus never had. They set up the camera in Emma's living room, positioning it so they were both in frame, sitting on her couch. They had written out what they wanted to say, keeping it simple and sincere. Emma would sign and Marcus would speak, translating her signs for the hearing audience. They did 3 takes before they got it right, both of them too nervous at first, stumbling over their words and signs, but the 3rd take was perfect. Emma signed with grace and emotion while Marcus spoke clearly and calmly. "We want to thank everyone for the overwhelming support and kindness you've shown us. The moment you saw in that coffee shop was real and spontaneous, and we're grateful it reminded people of the importance of inclusion, passion. However, we're also just 2 ordinary people trying to live our lives, and we ask that you respect our privacy moving forward. We won't be doing any media interviews or appearances. This is our story to tell, and we've told it. Thank you for understanding." They posted the video on Emma's social media account, the one that had gained 50,000 followers since the original video went viral. Within minutes, the comments started rolling in. Most were supportive and understanding, people thanking them for the message and wishing them well. But there were others, people who felt entitled to more of their story, who accused them of being ungrateful for the attention that had brought Emma so much financial support. One comment in particular stung. "You got your money and now you want to disappear? That's not how this works. You owe us." Emma read that comment and felt sick to her stomach. She didn't owe anyone anything. The money had been freely given, not a transaction that purchased rights to her life. Marcus saw her face change and immediately took the phone from her hands. "Don't read the comments," he signed, his movements more confident now after days of practice. "People who write things like that don't deserve your energy." Emma nodded, but the damage was done. The comment had articulated her worst fear, that accepting help from strangers came with strings attached, that she had somehow sold her privacy for tuition money. Marcus could see her spiraling, and he did something he hadn't planned. He reached out and pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly while she cried into his shoulder. It was the 2nd time he had held her, and this time the hug lasted longer, felt deeper, more meaningful. When Emma finally pulled away, her eyes were red, but she was smiling. She typed on her phone, "Thank you for being here, for understanding. I don't know what I would do without you." Marcus read the message and felt his heart clench. He typed back before he could stop himself, "You won't have to find out. I'm not going anywhere." They looked at each other for a long moment, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Emma leaned forward and kissed him. It was gentle and tentative, a question more than a statement, and Marcus found himself kissing her back, his hand coming up to cup her face. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard, both looking shocked at what had just happened. Emma immediately grabbed her phone and started typing frantically. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that. I don't know what I was thinking. You're still grieving and I just complicated everything and I'm so sorry. Marcus read her panicked message and shook his head. He took the phone from her and typed his response slowly, wanting to get the words exactly right. Don't apologize. I kissed you back. I wanted to kiss you back, but I need you to know something. I'm a mess, Emma. I'm broken in ways I don't even fully understand yet. I have a 7-year-old daughter who has to be my priority. I work 2 jobs and I'm exhausted all the time. I still cry over my dead wife. I'm not a good bet. Emma read his message and then typed her own. I'm a mess too. I'm deaf in a hearing world and some days that feels impossible. I'm terrified of starting college and failing. I have trust issues and anxiety and I sometimes go days without talking to anyone except my cat. She paused and then added, but maybe 2 messes together make something beautiful. Maybe we don't have to have it all figured out. Maybe we just have to be honest with each other. Marcus read her words and felt something loosen in his chest, some tight knot of fear and guilt that he had been carrying for so long. He reached out and took her hand, intertwining their fingers. Okay, he signed with his free hand. Let's try. Let's see what happens. For the next few weeks, Marcus and Emma fell into a careful, cautious relationship. They texted constantly, long, rambling conversations about everything and nothing. They met for coffee twice a week, always with Sophie present because neither of them was ready to explain to the little girl what was happening between them. They studied sign language together, Marcus improving rapidly under Emma's patient instruction. They took walks in the park and watched movies at Emma's apartment with subtitles turned on. They learned each other's rhythms and moods in unspoken languages. It was tentative and fragile and terrifying, but it was also wonderful. Sophie adored Emma and started asking when she was going to see her again approximately 10 minutes after every visit ended. She started bringing Emma drawings from school, asking Marcus to take photos so he could text them to her. She started referring to Emma as my friend Emma, emphasizing the possessive pronoun with the pride of a child who had claimed something precious. Marcus watched his daughter blossom under the attention of another caring adult, and he realized how much Sophie had been missing a maternal presence in her life. Helen tried her best, but she was Sophie's grandmother, not her mother. Emma was young and fun and patient, and Sophie responded to her with an openness that made Marcus's heart ache. But beneath the surface of this growing happiness, Marcus was struggling. The guilt hadn't disappeared. It had just changed shape. Now, instead of feeling guilty for enjoying Emma's company, he felt guilty for not feeling guilty enough. He would catch himself laughing at something Emma said and then immediately think of Lily, wondering if she could see him from wherever she was, wondering if she felt betrayed. He would lie awake at night, Emma's goodnight text still glowing on his phone, and feel like he was committing some kind of infidelity against a ghost. The rational part of his brain knew this was ridiculous. Lily was gone. She would want him to be happy. But grief isn't rational, and guilt doesn't follow the rules of logic. One night, about a month after the viral video, Marcus had a dream about Lily. They were in their old apartment, the one they had lived in before the accident, and she was painting at her easel like she used to. In the dream, Marcus told her about Emma, about Sophie's upcoming birthday, about his complicated feelings, and Dream Lily had turned to him with her paint-stained hands and her brilliant smile and said, "Marcus, my love, I'm gone, but you're still here. And that little girl in the other room deserves a father who is fully alive, not half dead with grief. Let yourself be happy. Please, let yourself be happy." Marcus woke up crying, but this time the tears felt cleansing rather than devastating. He felt like Lily had given him permission, even if it was just his subconscious talk. He felt like maybe he could finally forgive himself for surviving when she hadn't. The next morning, Marcus called Emma and asked if she would come to Sophie's birthday party. Not as a casual friend stopping by, but as his girlfriend. He used that word for the first time, girlfriend, and it felt both strange and right in his mouth. Emma was silent for a long moment on the other end of the video call, her face frozen in surprise. Then she signed slowly, carefully. "Are you sure? I don't want to confuse Sophie. I don't want to rush into something you're not ready for." Marcus signed back, his movement still imperfect but sincere. "I'm sure. Sophie already loves you, and I love you too. I think I've loved you since that day in the coffee shop when you cried because someone finally saw you." Emma's eyes filled with tears and she pressed her hand to the screen of her phone as if she could reach through and touch him. "I love you too," she signed. "I've been afraid to say it, afraid you would run away, afraid I was just a rebound or a distraction." Marcus shook his head firmly. "You're not a distraction. You're the first real thing I've felt in 3 years. You're the reason I remember what hope feels like." They sat there for a moment, just looking at each other through their phone screens, both of them crying and smiling at the same time. Then Emma wiped her eyes and signed, "I'd be honored to come to Sophie's birthday party, as your girlfriend." Sophie's birthday fell on a Saturday in early November. Marcus had saved enough money from his 2 jobs to buy the bicycle she wanted, a beautiful purple one with training wheels and a basket on the front. He'd also planned a small party at their apartment, inviting a few of Sophie's friends from school and Helen. He had told Sophie she could invite one special guest of her own choosing, and Sophie had immediately said Emma. Marcus had smiled and told her Emma would definitely be there, and Sophie had thrown her arms around him and said this was going to be the best birthday ever. The morning of the party, Marcus woke up with butterflies in his stomach. This was a big step. He was introducing Emma to his mother-in-law as his girlfriend. He was acknowledging publicly, at least within his small circle, that he was moving on. Helen had been supportive when he had called to tell her about Emma, but Marcus could hear the hesitation in her voice, the unspoken worry that he was replacing her daughter. He had assured her that no one could ever replace Lily, that Emma was something different, something new. Helen had said she understood, but Marcus knew it would be complicated. Grief was always complicated. Emma arrived early to help set up. She brought homemade cupcakes that she had spent all morning decorating, each one topped with elaborate frosting designs of unicorns and rainbows. When Sophie saw them, she squealed with delight and immediately hugged Emma around the waist. "These are the most beautiful cupcakes in the whole world," Sophie declared with the absolute certainty of a child. "You're the best, Emma." Emma knelt down and signed to Sophie, "Happy birthday, sweet girl. I'm so glad I get to celebrate with you." Sophie signed back, her movements enthusiastic if not entirely accurate. "I'm glad you're here. You make my daddy smile." The party was chaotic in the way that children's birthday parties always are. 7 second graders running around the small apartment, hopped up on sugar and excitement, playing games and opening presents and creating a beautiful, exhausting mess. Emma moved through it all with easy grace, helping Marcus serve food, settling disputes over whose turn it was on the toys, sitting on the floor to play with the kids. Marcus watched her and felt his heart swell with something that felt very much like love. She was a natural with children, patient and playful in equal measure. He could see her future so clearly, standing in front of a classroom of deaf children, teaching them that their differences were strengths, that they belonged in the world. When Helen arrived, the atmosphere shifted subtly. She was a tall, elegant woman in her early 60s, with the same dark eyes as her daughter. She hugged Sophie with fierce grandmotherly love and handed Marcus a card with money inside for Sophie's college fund, something she did every birthday. Then she turned to Emma, and there was a moment of awkward silence. Emma extended her hand for a handshake, but Helen surprised everyone by pulling her into a hug instead. "Thank you for making my son-in-law happy again," Helen said, her voice thick with emotion. "My daughter would have liked you." Emma pulled back from the hug with tears in her eyes. She pulled out her phone and typed, "I hope I can honor her memory by loving them well. I know I can never replace her. I wouldn't want to." Helen read the message and nodded, her own eyes glistening. "You're not replacing her. You're writing a new chapter. That's different, and that's good." The tension in the room eased after that, and Helen made an effort to include Emma in conversation, asking her about her plans for college, her family, her hopes for the future. By the end of the party, Helen and Emma were sitting together on the couch, communicating through a mixture of Helen's rusty sign language from a class she'd taken years ago and Emma's phone, finding common ground in their shared love for Marcus and Sophie. After the party wound down and the last guest had left, after Sophie had opened her big present and screamed with joy at the sight of the purple bicycle, after Helen had said her goodbyes with promises to have everyone over for Sunday dinner, Marcus and Emma finally had a moment alone. Sophie was in her room, exhausted but happy, playing quietly with her new toys. Marcus and Emma sat on the couch in the debris of the party, paper plates and deflated balloons scattered around them, and Emma leaned her head on Marcus's shoulder. He wrapped his arm around her and pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her shampoo, feeling the warmth of her body against his. For the first time in 3 years, Marcus felt like he had a future worth imagining. Not just a future of surviving day to day, but a future of building something new. He thought about Emma starting college in January, about Sophie growing up with another caring adult in her life, about the possibility of happiness that didn't require guilt as its companion. He signed to Emma with his free hand, "Thank you for being here today, for being part of our family." Emma tilted her head to look up at him and signed back, "This is exactly where I wanted." That night, after Emma had gone home and Sophie was asleep, Marcus sat at his kitchen table and did something he hadn't done since Lily died. He wrote her a letter. He knew she would never read it, but he needed to say the words anyway. He wrote about the past 3 years, about the grief and the loneliness and the crushing weight of single parenthood. He wrote about meeting Emma, about the viral video, about falling in love again when he thought love was behind him forever. He wrote about his guilt and his fear and his hope. And then he wrote the hardest sentence he had ever written. "I love Emma, and I think you would have loved her too. I'm going to build a life with her if she'll have. And I'm going to teach Sophie that love isn't finite. That making room for new people doesn't mean forgetting the ones we've lost. I'll never forget you, Lily, but I can't live in the past anymore. I hope you understand. I hope you're proud of me. I hope you're at peace." Marcus folded the letter carefully and put it in the box with the photo albums, tucking it between pictures of happier times. Then he allowed himself to imagine the future. He imagined Emma moving in eventually, her plants taking up residence on his windowsills. He imagined Sophie calling her mom someday, not to replace Lily, but to acknowledge the maternal role Emma was filling. He imagined getting married again, standing at an altar with Emma's hand in his, promising to love her for as long as they both live. He imagined a life that included laughter and partnership and the ordinary, extraordinary moments that made life worth living. But life has a way of interrupting our imagined futures. The next week, Marcus received a phone call that would test everything he and Emma had built. It was from a lawyer representing a major streaming service that wanted to turn their story into a movie. They were offering a substantial sum of money, enough to change Marcus's life completely, enough to quit both his jobs, to send Sophie to private school, to give her opportunities he never dreamed possible. But accepting the offer would mean giving up their privacy entirely, would mean allowing their love story to become public property, commodified and dramatized for mass consumption. Marcus sat in his car outside the elementary school, the lawyer's offer letter in his hand, and felt the weight of an impossible decision pressing down on his chest. fast. He called Emma immediately, needing to hear her voice, needing her wisdom. When she answered the video call, he explained the situation, his hands shaking as he signed. Emma listened carefully, her face thoughtful and serious. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment before signing her response. What does your heart tell you? What do you want, not what does the money want? Marcus looked at her face on his phone screen and realized he already knew the answer. I want my life to be my own. He signed. I want Sophie to grow up without cameras following her. I want us to be able to go to the park without wondering if someone is filming us. I want our love story to belong to us, not to strangers on the internet. But the money could change everything for Sophie. I could give her things I never dreamed possible. Emma nodded, understanding the weight of his conflict. She typed on her phone and held it up to the camera. Money is important, but peace is priceless, and Sophie already has everything she needs. She has a father who loves her more than anything in the world. That's worth more than any amount of money. Marcus felt tears slide down his cheeks as he read her words. You're right. I know you're right. But turning down that much money feels irresponsible. What kind of father chooses pride over his daughter's future? Emma's expression turned fierce and she signed with sharp, emphatic movements. You're not choosing pride. You're choosing dignity. You're teaching Sophie that some things can't be bought, that privacy matters, that people are not products. You're showing her how to live with integrity. That's the greatest gift you could give her. That night, Marcus called the lawyer and declined the offer. The lawyer tried to negotiate, increasing the sum, offering creative control, promising a sensitive portrayal. But Marcus held firm. His life was not for sale. When he told Sophie about the decision the next morning, explaining it in simple terms she could understand, Sophie had simply hugged him and said, "Good. I don't want to be famous, Daddy. I just want to be me." And in that moment, Marcus knew he had made the right choice. His 7-year-old daughter understood something that many adults never learn, that being yourself in a world that wants to commodify you is an act of rebellion. The decision brought Marcus and Emma closer together. They had faced their first major challenge as a couple and had navigated it with honesty and respect. They started spending more time together, Emma becoming a regular presence in Marcus and Sophie's daily life. She would come over for dinner several nights a week, helping Sophie with homework, teaching both Marcus and Sophie more advanced sign language. She introduced them to her deaf friends, expanding their world to include deaf culture, deaf art, deaf poetry. Marcus began to see deafness not as a disability but as a different way of experiencing the world, one with its own richness and beauty. In January, Emma started her first semester at the university. She was nervous and excited, carrying her backpack like a shield as she walked into her first class. The crowdfunding money had covered her tuition and books, and she had enough left over to quit her job at the coffee shop and focus entirely on her studies. Tyler had thrown her a goodbye party at Cornerstone Coffee, and all the regular customers had shown up to wish her well. It was bittersweet leaving the place where she had met Marcus, but she was ready for this next chapter. Her education classes were challenging but fulfilling. She was learning pedagogy and child development and curriculum design, all through the lens of deaf education. Her professors were impressed with her passion and insight, and her classmates quickly learned that Emma had a unique perspective that enriched every discussion. She found herself becoming an advocate, speaking up when professors made assumptions about deaf children, educating her hearing peers about deaf culture. She was finding her voice, even though that voice was expressed through her hands and her words on a screen rather than through sound. Marcus, meanwhile, was discovering his own form of advocacy. He started volunteering at Sophie's school, helping Mrs. Patterson expand the sign language curriculum. What had started as a simple unit on the alphabet grew into a comprehensive program that taught basic conversational sign language to all second graders. Marcus would come in during his lunch break from the janitorial job, still wearing his work clothes, and teach the children signs for emotions, for family members, for everyday objects. The kids loved him. He had a gentle, patient teaching style that made learning feel like play. Mrs. Patterson pulled him aside one day after a particularly successful lesson. "Have you ever thought about becoming a teacher? You're a natural with the kids." Marcus had laughed it off at first, but the question planted a seed. He was 32 years old. Was it too late to go back to school, to pursue a different career? He mentioned it to Emma that night, expecting her to tell him he was crazy, but instead, her eyes had lit up with excitement. Why not? She had signed. "If I can go to college at 25, you can go at 32. We could study together. We could both become teachers." The idea was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. Over the next few months, Marcus began researching teaching credential programs. He looked at class schedules and tuition costs and admission requirements. It would be hard. He would have to keep working while going to school. He would have less time with Sophie, but the more he thought about it, the more right it felt. He had spent 3 years invisible, cleaning up after other people, living a half-life. Maybe it was time to step back into the light. Maybe it was time to rebuild his life into something that felt purposeful again. In March, Marcus applied to the teaching credential program at the same university Emma attended. His application essay was raw and honest, describing his journey from grief to hope, his accidental education in sign language, his desire to teach children that differences should be celebrated rather than tolerated. He wrote about Sophie, about Emma, about the viral video that had changed his life in ways both wanted and unwanted. He wrote about finding purpose in unexpected places. 2 months later, he received his acceptance letter. He was going to be a teacher. The celebration that night was loud and joyful. Helen came over with champagne. Sophie made a congratulations banner with glitter and markers, and Emma cooked dinner for everyone. They toasted to new beginning, to second chances, to the courage it takes to start over. Helen looked at Marcus with tears in her eyes and said, "Lily would be so proud of you." And Marcus, for the first time, could accept those words without feeling crushing guilt. He knew Lily would be proud. He was proud of himself. As summer approached, Marcus made another decision. He quit his weekend maintenance job at the shopping center. With his acceptance into the teaching program came a small scholarship, and combined with his salary from the elementary school, he could just barely make ends meet. More importantly, he could have his weekends back. He could spend Saturdays at the park with Sophie and Emma. He could have lazy Sunday mornings drinking coffee and reading the paper. He could breathe. On the first Saturday after he quit the second job, Marcus, Emma, and Sophie went to Riverside Park, the place where this whole journey had really begun. They brought a picnic lunch and a soccer ball, and they spent the afternoon playing in the grass, chasing each other, collapsing and giggling. Sophie ran ahead to the playground, and Marcus and Emma sat on their familiar bench, watching her climb and swing and slide. Emma leaned her head on Marcus's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "I have something to ask you," Marcus signed with his free hand. Emma lifted her head to look at him, curious. Marcus's heart was pounding, but he continued, "I love you. Sophie loves you. You've become part of our family in every way that matters. And I know it's fast, and I know we're both still figuring things out, but I don't want to wait. I don't want to waste time being cautious when life is so short." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. It wasn't a fancy ring. He couldn't afford fancy, but it was beautiful in its simplicity, a small diamond on a silver band. "Emma Rodriguez, will you marry me?" Emma's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. For a moment, Marcus panicked, thinking he had moved too fast, that he had ruined everything. But then Emma was nodding, tears streaming down her face, her hands moving in emphatic signs. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Marcus slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, and then they were kissing, right there on the park bench in the late afternoon sun. And Marcus felt like his heart might burst from the sheer, overwhelming joy of it all. Sophie noticed from the playground and came running over. "What's happening? Why is Emma crying? Are you okay?" Marcus pulled his daughter onto his lap and signed as he spoke. "Emma and I are getting married. She's going to be part of our family forever. Is that okay with you?" Sophie's face split into the biggest smile Marcus had ever seen. She launched herself at Emma, wrapping her small arms around her neck. "You're going to be my mom?" Emma held Sophie close and nodded, her tears falling into Sophie's hair. "If you want me to be, I would be so honored." Sophie pulled back and looked at Emma with absolute seriousness. "I want you to be my mom. My first mom is in heaven, but you can be my earth mom. And I think my heaven mom would be happy because you'll make my daddy smile again." The three of them sat on that bench, wrapped in each other's arms, and watched the sun begin to set over the park. Around them, life continued. Children played, dogs barked, couples walked hand in hand. But in their small circle, time seemed to stand still. This was their moment, their new beginning, their second chance at happiness. They were married 6 months later in a small ceremony at the same park where Marcus had proposed. It was an intimate gathering, just 20 people, the ones who mattered most. Helen stood beside Marcus as his best woman, tears streaming down her face throughout the entire ceremony. Tyler stood beside Emma, signing the vows along with the officiant so Emma's deaf friends could follow along. Sophie was the flower girl, taking her role with utmost seriousness, scattering petals with careful precision. The ceremony was conducted in both spoken English and sign language, a beautiful bilingual expression of love that honored both their world. When the officiant pronounced them married, Marcus and Emma kissed while their small audience erupted in applause, and the deaf guests waved their hands in the air, the sign language version of clapping. Sophie rushed forward and threw her arms around both of them, creating a three-person hug that a photographer captured in a picture that would sit on their mantle for years to come. It was a simple wedding, nothing like the elaborate affairs featured in magazines. There was no expensive venue, no designer dress, no professional videographer, but it was perfect. It was theirs. And it was filled with more genuine joy than any grand production could have manufactured. They moved into a larger apartment a month after the wedding, one with 2 bedrooms so Sophie could have her own space and Emma's plants wouldn't take over the living room. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. Emma's books filled the shelves alongside Sophie's toys. Marcus's coffee maker shared counter space with Emma's elaborate tea collection. Wedding photos hung on walls next to Sophie's artwork and pictures of Lily because that was important to all of them. Lily wasn't erased or forgotten. She was honored as the woman who had loved Marcus first, who had given him Sophie, who had shaped the man he became. Emma never tried to replace her, and Marcus never asked her to. They simply made room for both the past and the present to coexist. Marcus started the teaching credential program that fall, and it was as challenging as he had anticipated. He would work his janitorial shift at the elementary school from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon, then rush to the university for evening classes, often not getting home until 9 at night. He studied after Sophie went to bed, often falling asleep over his textbooks. There were moments when he questioned whether he could do it, whether the exhaustion was worth it. But then he would teach a lesson on sign language to Mrs. Patterson's class and see a child face light up with understanding, and he would remember why he was doing this. Emma was thriving in her education program. She had found her calling working with deaf and hard of hearing children during her practicum placement. She had a way of connecting with them that came from lived experience, from understanding their frustrations and their joys in a way that hearing teachers couldn't. One little boy, a 6-year-old who had been labeled difficult and uncooperative by previous teachers, had flourished under Emma's instruction. She had realized he wasn't difficult, he was just bored. Once she challenged him with more advanced material, he transformed into an eager, engaged student. Emma cried with pride when his parents thanked her for seeing their son's potential instead of his limitations. Sophie was growing up surrounded by 2 languages and 2 cultures, and it was shaping her into a remarkable child. At 8 years old, she was fully bilingual in English and American Sign Language. She would interpret for deaf adults at the grocery store when she saw them struggling to communicate with hearing clerks. She had become a fierce advocate for inclusion at her school, once getting sent to the principal's office for yelling at a classmate who made fun of a deaf student. When Marcus asked her about it, Sophie had said with absolute conviction, "That's not okay, Daddy. Everyone deserves to be treated with kindness. It doesn't matter if they're different." 2 years after the viral video, Marcus completed his teaching credential and was hired at Riverside Elementary, the same school where he had worked as a janitor. But now he walked through those familiar hallways as Mir Chun, the 3rd-grade teacher who specialized in inclusive education and sign language. Some of his former colleagues had trouble adjusting to the change, still seeing him as the janitor rather than their peer. But most embraced his transformation with warmth and respect. Mrs. Patterson, who had retired, came to visit his classroom on his first day and told him she had always known he was meant for more than cleaning floors. Marcus's classroom was different from the others. It was bright and welcoming, with posters in both English and sign language covering the walls. He had a special section for deaf and hard of hearing students with assistive technology and visual learning tools. But more than that, he created a culture of acceptance and curiosity. His students learned that differences were interesting rather than scary. They learned basic sign language as part of their regular curriculum. They learned to look at people's abilities rather than their disability. And they learned that their teacher, Mr. Chun, understood what it meant to feel invisible because he had lived it. Emma graduated with her degree in deaf education and immediately got a job at the state school for the deaf. She was finally doing the work she had dreamed of for so long, teaching deaf children that they were whole and complete exactly as they were. She taught them language and math and science, but more importantly, she taught them pride. She taught them that being deaf wasn't something to overcome or fix. It was simply another way of being human. Her students adored her, and their parents were grateful for a teacher who truly understood their children's experiences. The viral video had long since faded from public consciousness, replaced by newer viral moments and fresh inspirational content. Occasionally, someone would recognize Marcus or Emma from that 30-second clip, but it was rare. They had successfully reclaimed their privacy, built lives that belonged to them rather than to the internet. The video still existed somewhere in the digital archives, but it no longer defined them. It was simply the beginning of their story, not the entire narrative. 3 years after they married, Marcus and Emma returned to Cornerstone Coffee on a quiet Tuesday morning. They hadn't been back since the day everything changed. The shop looked exactly the same worn wooden floors, the same mismatched furniture, the same smell of fresh coffee and possibility. Tyler was still working there, now the manager, and when he saw them walk in, his face split into a huge grin. He came around the counter and hugged them both. "Look at you too," he said, signing as he spoke. "Living your happily ever after." They sat at a corner table, the same table where Emma used to take her breaks when she worked there. Marcus ordered a black coffee, and Emma ordered a caramel latte, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the morning rush of customers. A young barista, new since Emma's time, was taking orders with practiced efficiency, and then Marcus noticed something. There was a customer at the counter, an elderly man who was clearly deaf. He was trying to point to the menu, but the young barista looked flustered, unsure how to communicate. Marcus watched as the man's shoulders slumped with familiar resignation, preparing for another interaction where he would be made to feel like a burden. Without thinking, Marcus stood up and walked to the counter. He signed to the elderly man, asking what he would like to order. The man's face transformed with surprise and gratitude. Marcus took his order, then translated it to the confused barista. He paid for the man's coffee himself, waving away his attempts to reimburse him. The elderly man signed thank you with tears in his eyes, and Marcus signed back, "You're welcome. Have a beautiful day." When Marcus returned to the table, Emma was watching him with a look of pure love. "You just did what you did for me," she signed. "You saw someone who was invisible and you made them visible." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. "You taught me that," he signed. "You taught me that the smallest gestures of kindness can change everything. You taught me that seeing people, really seeing them, is the most important thing we can do." Emma squeezed his hand and smiled. "We taught each other. That's what love is. teaching each other how to be better humans. They finished their coffee and walked out into the bright morning sunshine hand in hand. Somewhere in the city, Sophie was in her 4th grade class, probably teaching her friends new signs during recess. Somewhere, the elderly man from the coffee shop was drinking his latte and feeling a little less alone in the world. Somewhere, a teenager was watching an old viral video and learning that compassion matters. And in this moment, Marcus and Emma were simply two people who had found each other in the most unexpected way, who had built a life from 30 seconds of genuine human connection. The story that began with a viral video had become something much bigger and more beautiful than internet fame. It had become a life, a real, messy, complicated, wonderful life filled with love and purpose and the daily choice to see people who others might overlook. Marcus was no longer invisible. Emma was no longer alone, and together they were teaching the next generation that kindness isn't just a nice gesture, it's a way of moving through the world. It's how we remind each other that we all matter, that we're all worthy of being seen. As they walked down the street toward their car, Marcus signed to Emma without looking at her, knowing she would catch the movement in her peripheral vision. "I love you," Emma signed back. The gesture so natural now it was like breathing. "I love you too." And somewhere above them, if you believed in such things, maybe Lily was watching and smiling, proud of the man Marcus had become, grateful that her daughter had found a mother who loved her fiercely, at peace knowing that love doesn't end with death. It just makes room for new love to grow alongside the old. That's how their story ended, or perhaps how it truly began.